This is Wally Brown here with the current president of the Georgia Textiles Club. So, what is your dance alias?
Wait, do I just... Okay. Gym Locker.
Jim Locker. So, why is your name Jim Locker?
When I got that name, I was into a style called locking, and I was trying to think of a funny or pun-based name that I could use, so that's what I came up with.
Are you aware of the crew Lost in the Gym?
I am not.
Okay. I thought there might be an affiliation. Okay, so which crews do you represent?
I represent Concrete Samurais, Textiles, and from Sacramento, I represent Adrenaline Rush and Rhythm of Change.
So, how long have you been here in Georgia?
I've been here since fall of 2012, around August. I came here for college, and before that I was in Sacramento, California.
Were you born in Sacramento?
Yes.
Did you grow up watching Even Stevens?
No.
Oh, that took place in Sacramento. All right. So, why do you dance?
Well, originally it was just to look cool, but after a while, it was more about the community. Like, I grew up as a multiracial person, so I didn't have a specific ethnic group that I could identify myself with or like had a community around. And I participate in the dance community. I throw events, and a lot of that is all because it's nice to find people who are like me.
So, through dance, have you found a lot of like-minded people?
Yeah, I think so. That's like why I joined the crews that I joined.
Would you say that dance helped give you an identity?
Definitely, yeah. I think it's like been really helpful in that aspect of like my adolescence and my early adulthood.
So, do you think that you got to create your own identity, or was it given to you through the dance?
A little of both. I think in some respect it's like, what are you aesthetically naturally drawn towards that kind of helps identify how you'll dance. So you don't always have control over that. But in terms of maybe you decide to study a non-hip-hop or non-street dance form, or even just movement form like a martial art, and that can inform your style. So a lot of people are really into capoeira or kung fu, and that informs how they dance, and you can tell that is part of who they are, and so that becomes part of their identity. But I think for me, a lot of it was based on environment and then what I found myself drawn towards, not so much me saying oh, I'm gonna do this, but that was usually after subliminal hooks had gotten into me, saying oh, I want to do this dance style, or I want to dance like this.
So, how long have you been dancing?
I've been dancing since winter 2010, so about almost 6 years now.
Was that a special winter?
Not really. I just happened to have a friend who was going to dance classes at a studio, and they just happened to have hired someone who's from the real street community. So that was basically my gateway into the community through a studio.
What was your teacher's name?
His name is Mikey Joaquin. He currently he used to be part of the Jabberwockies tour company, and now he lives in Australia.
Dang. That's cool. What style of dance did you do?
So he started off with breaking, I think, and then he did some time working in different choreo crews. But eventually he decided to study more, mostly locking, which is what kind of brought me into it.
Jim Locker.
Yeah. And then he left to join the Jabberwockies, and when he left, he was sort of the only person from the community who was doing that style, and because I was a student, I was sort of forced into that position, not necessarily by my own will, but it was sort of natural for me to fill that position, and that was really interesting because he was so much more mature, older than me, just as his age he was older than me, but also he was a more experienced dancer, a more mature like artist than I was at the time. So it was interesting.
So you fulfilled the role of teacher once he left?
Kind of. I think like within my high school and like the people I danced with, I became the person who taught locking, but I was still aware of other people in the community who were teaching locking, but it wasn't really anybody who was like much more experienced than me. It was mostly people who had learned from the same people I had learned from, or the people who taught, my teacher. So it was never really like I was the only guy, but it was also because it wasn't exactly popular. But with the people who knew me and the people who danced with me, whenever they wanted to learn locking, they would come to me. So that was pretty cool.
So do you ever go back to your community?
Yeah, I try to go back as often as I can. Like anytime I have a break or time off from school, I go home. And I think that like it's really cool to have been from a place and then I wasn't as impactful in the community there just because it was so much bigger and more mature than I was at the time, and to leave and to come back at different stages of my growth over the past 4 or 5 years has been really cool just because like I feel like I'm new but I'm still old like to the community. So there's certain people who have joined the community, who've joined the become a part of the community more recently who don't really know me, and then a lot of people who have been there for a long time who do know me, and it's kind of interesting because like it's like home but it's still new, so it's pretty cool.
So when you were coming up in Sacramento, where did you all practice dance?
So it was kind of weird. So like the studio that I was talking about, they have a competitive team, Adrenaline Rush, which is I joined that after a year of taking classes there, and so they had like a studio, a pretty legit place to practice. But then aside from that, I was also part of two other crews. One was at my high school called Rhythm of Change, and we practiced just sort of in like a next to the gymnasium room that had mirrors. It was called the dance room, but it wasn't really made for our club because we weren't. There were a lot of like bureaucratic reasons we couldn't use the room for like, oh, you needed to have a 21 or older coach present to just in case something went wrong, or like a teacher needed to be there the whole time, which was really hard to get to happen because it was a public high school, and a lot of the teachers were already very busy.
Pressed for time.
Yeah, they weren't. Yeah, they didn't have a wealth of time. So
Were they open to other dance styles using the room, like ballet and modern?
well, we had a drill team which had gotten national level placings in recent years, and I think as far as I know they're still at that level. So they obviously got priority over us, but we tried to schedule around their times, and it would still be we faced with red tape. So a lot of times if we couldn't get in the room, we would just practice outside. If it was raining, we'd practice under the awnings in the hallways or whatever. So we would sort of just do whatever we needed to do because a lot of times it just wasn't available. And then aside from that, I was also part of another crew in my last year of high school called Academy of Thugs. And
Were y'all thugging?
not really.
Y'all thugging.
It's pretty anti-thug actually. We practiced in a church. We had, I guess, a rental agreement with the multi-purpose room of some church that was based in like a strip mall type thing, like a little shopping center, and that was having some pretty hard times. And this is like 2010, 2011, 2012 is still not quite recovering from the economic crisis. So, there were a lot of areas, and that area in particular was not well equipped to handle like an economic downturn. So a lot of the spaces around the church were empty, and it was really interesting, like just to see there's a church and then we're just like practicing there. It was kind of weird, but it was a nice place. We had like a nice hardwood floor, and it was generally clean, and we could pretty much always go there if we needed to. So yeah, that was like our home base for a long time.
When you came back here, well, when you came here to Georgia, where did you practice initially?
So, Textiles, the club that I'm the head of right now, they started off when I got here, they were practicing in the campus rec center. So that was sort of the main place to practice. And I guess it was. I mean, it's like a gym, and the problem with that building, that place is that they don't allow us to use the in-building speaker system, which are like really nice speakers, but for some reason clubs aren't allowed to use them. Only people who pay to host and attend classes there at the gym, like aerobics classes or yoga classes, are allowed to use those systems. So only instructors of like an actual class, not clubs just renting out or just using the space. Because we got the space for free, but on top of that problem, it tends to be overbooked. So, but starting out, that was the main place, and like that was where they practiced that whole year, my freshman year.
Who was the president before you?
This guy named Scott Knudsen. He he was not really part of the community. I think he inherited the club from a time where it was a little bit more established, and he hadn't really made the same like community connections that the previous presidents had. So it was kind of weird. Like he didn't really make an effort to host events with the club. Didn't really make much of an effort to go to do any performances as a part of the club. So mostly what he did was just schedule practices, from what I know. Yeah, and that was pretty much where we practiced when we first started out here.
So when did you become the president of the club?
So I was elected my second semester here, and because Scott was graduating.
You were still a freshman.
Yeah, but because of the way it worked, it was like that was like a transitionary semester, so I wasn't in charge that semester. It was just like elected to be the next president. So that started my sophomore year. I was like acting president.
So when you became president, what were some of your like goals for the club?
I think generally the first goal is to do some sort of event that would be more like community centric. I mean, they hadn't really been doing events, but the history of the club has a lot of pretty important events in its lineage, and I wasn't really aware of that until after I started throwing events here. But like in addition to just like throwing events, I wanted to see like more people like actually dedicated, and less people sort of just showing up and messing around and then sort of leaving, or socializing and leaving. It didn't really seem like it was a real club. It was like you had people who were part of the gymnastics club, and they came and they did like what we call power moves. They were doing those and teaching other people how to do them, but they mostly stayed within their own little clique, and new people weren't really offered a lot of resources or help with getting started unless you explicitly asked for it, which is a hard thing for a lot of people to do. Definitely recognizing like I come from a studio background, I wouldn't have been able to do that if I just showed up and seen people doing crazy things that I don't know how to do and trying to ask them how to like for help. So yeah, one of the reasons why I wanted to host events is because one of the guys from Academy of Thugs who had graduated high school and went to University of Washington in Seattle, he was instrumental in hosting and bringing some people from Sacramento out to reign supreme, and this was in 2013. So when I saw that he did that, he wasn't the sole person behind it, and they had like a club, a lot of infrastructure behind them that allowed them to do that. But I thought, why can't I do that? So that was sort of the first thing that motivated me to actually put effort towards making an event here.
So what was your first major event here?
The first thing we did was called the Summit, and it was kind of a weird thing. Basically, I had been in contact with people from the beatboxing club since fall of my freshman year.
Buzz beats.
Yeah, and they've been always like a really cool ally for us because we tend to perform at the same events. So some of our first performances, some of the first performances that I was involved with, we would go and they would just happen to be there, and it was a pretty low key performance. So we just decided to say, oh, why don't you guys we'll do our routine and then you guys do your thing, and then we can have you guys beatbox, and then we'll have like a little dance beatbox combination for a little bit because our what we do is complementary to each other. So we decided to throw an event that would involve a beatbox battle and then also a dance battle. And we also found another club that was here called the Georgia Tech Electronic Music Collective, and so we decided why don't they just DJ for us, and so it was pretty cool. But I think part of the problem was that in the dance community we have a huge library of songs that we're used to hearing that are just sort of part of all our traditions and our culture, and to have someone else sort of come in and kind of late to that, or someone who's from more of a electronic DJ background, they can't really tap into that easily because there's not really a Wikipedia list or anything like that that you can just look up and then download it all. It's something you have to, even as a dancer, if you're not a DJ, you have to learn about all of that stuff progressively coming up in the culture. So it was a little bit weird to have them do that, but I think the event went well. We didn't really have anybody from the community come out because I specifically wanted it to be focused with people in tech, so that it could we still had control over it, because I knew that if I opened the doors and I didn't have, at the time, it wasn't really that present in the community, it would either get hijacked or it would get, people would recognize that it was a free event with no prize money. And people, for what I know, they weren't really doing that at the time, or that wasn't a common thing in Atlanta. So I was worried that people would get annoyed. They'd think that it was something that it wasn't, just having not read the full Facebook description or whatever. So the first two times we did that in fall of 2013 and then spring of 2014. Both those times it was very low-key, just people from the tech community. And then from there, we started to let more people in after that.
Thing. So, I guess you also started opening your practices to people outside the community, right?
Yeah. So part of that was, like I said, we started off with the CRC, the Campus Rec Center, and that continued until fall of 2013, I believe. That was the last semester where we only did practices there, and then in spring of 2014, we started to migrate our practices to the Van Leer building, which is just it's the electrical engineering building, and they just were generally had spaces of classrooms open. There was tile floor, and they had speakers that weren't great, but they were pretty loud inside the projector system.
Mm-hmm.
So basically everything we needed to practice, except for they had tables on the floor that we could move. So all we had to do is clear the room and then put it back when we started and ended. So it was a small price to pay for a nice, small but very intimate and more, a lot more productive environment for us. And part of that was also just having less sort of scheduled, structured practices where everybody's just sort of doing their own thing, and having more just sort of sessions and just hanging out and dancing, and less sort of we're here for textiles practice and we're practicing right now type of stuff.
Do you think that the new setting has helped your club become more intimate?
Well, so that lasted for, I think, 3 semesters. We ended up getting kicked out of that building. But we have always had CRC practices, and then 2014 spring we did CRC in Van Leer. Fall 2014 we started having mostly Van Leer, still CRC practices, spring 2015, I believe we were still having mostly van leader practices and some CRC practices, and then after that semester we got kicked out of that building. So now, but at the same time, they started the student center built the Peachtree Room, which is the only room in the entire building that has hardwood floors. So we started booking that building, and then also using a place on campus called the Student Success Center. They have a tile floor basement, or a linoleum floor basement, which is generally open to reservation. So that's become our new sort of home base for practices. And since doing all those things, like especially Van Leer, you and Cleo and people from the community started coming out, as well as when we moved to the Student Success Center, other people from the community, Ron the Great, people like Taj have started coming out. So it's been really good, just because when people see different levels of dance, they get to be a little bit more inspired.
So well, I guess for you, you're like at the end of your college career, well, at least your undergraduate career. So what's on your mind, like, in terms of transitioning the club, and like, are you going to go out with a bang?
Yeah, I mean, it would be cool to like kind of throw an event as I leave, but I'm focused more on like making sure that Southbound, which is the other event that we throw here, it's happened twice before. The first time it happened was in summer of 2014, and there were a few reasons why it was like notable in the greater landscape of Atlanta. First, there were two judges who basically one of them doesn't judge at all in the United States for the most part. Brian Green,
Yeah.
and then the other one basically has never been to this area of the country, Popping Pete, and so the two of them kind of headlining the event. And Brian Green is one of my teachers and mentors in house dance and just dance in general, and so he supported me helping throw that event, investing in the event, and helping me to throw it. So it wasn't really Textiles throwing that; it was more so me and him. And then the second time around, we did it in fall of 2015, and that was a really big success. And the reason the first one was notable was also because it was the first time we did a house battle in Atlanta.
Yeah.
And as far as I know, in the state, there's never been one before. So then, going into fall 2015, Southbound, we were focused on bringing in kind of a different level of talent. I have to say, like, Brian and I didn't exactly agree at the end of that event, of the first event, and our relationship was kind of strained as a result. But going into the second one, I felt more confident that I could do it on my own with the help of the club and not needing an outside person to help me. And that event worked out pretty well, and it was like the first time that B-Boy Free had come to Georgia, and so that was pretty cool because a lot of people have been big fans of him, especially in the B-Boy community. So that was cool. But now we're going into our third one in February 2017, and I guess I'm just trying to find the best ways to make it what I want it to be. Like, since this is my last chance to be like the leader of it, I want it to be the best it can be, but I also want it to be something that sets up the future for textiles, for it to be sustainable. A lot of the previous events we've done has been basically me funding it out of pocket. For a lot of it, just because there's not a ton of support from the school funding systems, but I could think of a lot of worse things to spend my money on than a dance event. So, and I feel like if I'm the one sort of putting everything forward, I need to be the one sort of making the investment, even if I don't get any return, because at the end of the day, I'd rather have a better community here than like more money in my pocket.
Wow. Let's see. we have just two more questions. Okay. Do you think that transportation, well, all right, so like transportation in the South versus like Sacramento, are there any notable differences?
So Sacramento is considerably less metropolitan than Atlanta, but it's equally spread out. It's just not as highly developed in the downtown, midtown area. And that's still a fairly new thing in Atlanta, but like Atlanta has a subway system and Sacramento just doesn't. They have one line of light rail that goes along the one corridor of the city. That's
Speed of.
no, but it's pretty useless unless you live and work along that line. So
Yeah.
it's not the best. But in comparison, like Atlanta's not amazing either. Like there are a lot of problems with MARTA and the public transportation system here, but it's just like in comparison, Sacramento's far worse. It's just that Sacramento is slightly better laid out in terms of highways and roads. It's a little bit more cohesive than Atlanta, but not by miles. But the problem with that I see in Atlanta is that like you have not so great public transportation and pretty bad city planning and city layout that are more a result of history than they are a result of like one person screwing it up. So it's not really something where you can point fingers at anybody and feel better about yourself, but like it's just a problem of the way the city's laid out. And it's also like the people who invest in MARTA, the people who vote on that stuff and the people who end up paying the taxes that pay for it generally are not the people taking it. So for them, there's not enough of an incentive for them to invest in it because a lot of them live, probably living in rich neighborhoods and have a car and they don't really care about public transportation that much. But for the community, dance-wise, I think it's like a huge problem because we have jams all over the place and the city's so spread out to the point where sometimes we consider like people from Alabama and Tennessee part of our scene, which is strange. And it's not bad, but like it's a result of just the fact that we have to sort of band together. And I think it being so spread out and the likelihood of those spread out things being near a MARTA station are pretty low generally. We're kind of lucky that we're fairly near a MARTA station, but it's still hard to get people to use it because it's quite a hassle parking your car all day and trying to make sure that you get back using MARTA because dance events tend to end late. You never know what time you'll get back and if MARTA will be running or safe at that time. So it's just something that puts a bit of a like limit on how we can grow the scene, which is kind of a result of like it also hinders the growth of the city. So
Nice. There's two more questions. Going forward, post grad, how do you plan to balance like your professional and personal life with your dance life?
I'm not really sure. Besides dance, I also make and play and produce music. So I know a lot of people who are really, really great dancers, have been really great dancers for a long time, who still work a 9 to 5, and they don't have a lot of complaints about it. But I can see that if they didn't love their day job, then it would definitely wear on them a lot. So part of me is kind of, my plan is generally just to apply to jobs. I'm generally trying to move back to the West Coast, probably to the Bay Area, because a lot of the traditions in house dance culture that I like are from there. And that area also happens to be rich in technology, so that works out for me as a CS major. But I could definitely see myself starting off working a full-time job and then maybe switching to a part-time job and working with either my dance or my music on the side, and then slowly migrating that to be my full-time thing. But I don't know, it just depends on a lot of different factors. So I definitely don't see myself stopping. That's like the last thing I see myself doing. Like, it would just be a matter of how I can fit the most amount of dance and other stuff into my schedule while not like getting fired.
Okay. And I guess like, where do you see like the future of dance going? Like, you're old enough to have seen like you came in and there's an older generation, and you came in and like you were the newer generation. So what do you see now with like the newer generation of dancers going forward?
So I guess it's pretty cool because like Atlanta and Sacramento they suffer from similar problems, in my opinion, and those are pretty much a matter of like citywide identity crisis. The problem with the problem with cities like Atlanta and Sacramento, which
For all cities.
yeah, I mean, besides that, I think they're not, they're not like the first three cities that come to your mind when you think of the U.S. And as a result, even though we're well-developed, well-known cities, we can still feel like, to use this word regrettably, like bastards. And the dance scene kind of it precipitates to the dance scene because Atlanta's always looking, and Sacramento does the exact same thing too. Always looking at New York, always looking at LA. What are they doing? What should we be doing to do what they do? You know, what kind of movies are they putting out? What kind of videos are they putting out, dance-wise? What kind of new scenes? What new music are they doing? How can we bring that here? Instead of thinking about what new thing can we do here that they would want to do, and it's pretty interesting because like the hip hop music scene here has already reached that level. Like Atlanta is extremely influential in the global music scene, but in the dance scene, we're like a drop in the bucket. And so I think that that's part of what would need to happen for Atlanta, is just like find an identity and kind of raising the level of artistry, from just focusing on battles and footage and stuff like that to, what about stuff like dance theater, stuff like street performance? People aren't really exploiting those avenues as much as they are in other cities. So yeah, stuff like that. And in terms of like a global, like the dance community in general, generation-wise, I feel like the problem that faces like my generation of dancers is just addiction to social media. And in reality, like the dance community is based on personal relationships and the fact that we all like each other and that we all want to see each other, aside from just like getting down and dancing. If we get to the point where people only want to see each other when there's a battle and a prize money involved, then we're in really big trouble, because that means that we're not really a community, we're just like a job. And yeah, I think something similar to that, which I've discussed a lot with like people I look up to, and people from my crews, is the problem of lack of mentorship. And it's the same issue that you see in like historically black communities in America. Just a lack of direction from the older generation, and it's not so much a problem of with the dance community. It's not so much a problem they don't exist. It's more a problem of ego and not wanting to ask for help, not knowing what help involves, not wanting to pay for help. Just not recognizing the problems that exist, because a lot of people want to just show up for the battle, especially in Atlanta. They'll skip the workshop and show up for the battle. Whether it's out of, I don't want to show the judge my moves before the competition, or they just don't have the money. It's like, that's a huge problem. Without an avenue for knowledge to spread down to the next generation, it's going to be really tough to keep a level of quality high. And like when we have a global community, the U.S. is going to have an issue keeping up, because other countries have figured out how to develop infrastructure to help their dance communities, and grow in that way. And there's a level of respect there. Um, and in the U.S., just because of the way that hip hop culture is spread, like starting off with like music and then spreading dance and like just different things have come to light at different times. It hasn't really been a smooth transition. It's Yeah, I think that's a big problem for the next generation. But like in Atlanta, I see that like the wheels are turning, that things are moving generally in the right direction. We may not be as like notable in the dance community as we once were at the like height of what some people call like the Dragon House era, but like or even before that. But I think that it's sort of like a dormancy, not so much like where like our scene's gone extinct. I think there's a lot of good stuff coming out of Atlanta. It's just like it's making that transition between, it starts out as an underground scene that's completely underground, then a few people start to make it out, and then once people start making it out, people feel motivated. But if people stop, there's a lull there, you know, like if So You Think You Can Dance gets canceled and people from Atlanta stop qualifying, then you're gonna see a lull in the people making an effort to like
Keep dancing.
yeah, keep dancing and try to make it into a career for them. And then just trying to make that transition into like seeking, like having like a sort of insecure scene that seeks outside, like
Recognition.
yeah, like recognizing that someone else from the outside recognizing that you're worth it. Where as in other scenes that are a lot more mature, have a lot more community traditions behind them, they have built their own platforms from within, and it ultimately like it achieves a lot of longevity that you can't really do if you're just hoping for a TV show to catch you and make you into a star. So yeah, that's what I would say.
So, saying that there is like a dancer who makes it from like So You Think You Can Dance. Say there's like two, and then they come to our events. Could we call that Dancing with the Stars?
No, I think it's probably trademarked.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Mr. Jim Locker.